So, with all the talk about inflation and inflation risk, what does it mean for your investment portfolio right now across your ISAs, your general investment account, and across your pensions? I mean, if you've been following the news and you've been watching the market sell off, you wouldn't be blamed if you felt as though leaving your money into the stock market is essentially like torching your money and basically watching it go up in smoke. But what does inflation actually mean? Is it good? Is it bad? What tends to happen when inflation increases? What does the government do? What impact does it have on investors like you and I? What impact does it have on stock markets? Are there any things that you can do to help combat the impact of inflation on your hard-earned cash? These are all the questions that we're going to be looking to answer in today's video. So if you've not subscribed, consider subscribing. Make sure you smash the like button and hit the notification bell. I post every Tuesday and every Friday at 5 p.m. But let's start this off by answering the question, what is inflation? So inflation is essentially the cost of goods and services going up around you. And the best way to give an example of this is to look at your weekly shop. If you go to Tesco's or Waitrose or Aldi for your weekly shop, and your weekly shop costs you £100, if next week it costs you £105, that £5 difference is essentially inflation. Inflation effectively means our purchasing power. And with inflation increasing over time, it means that you'll be able to buy less and less with your money over time. And therefore, when we talk about inflation as a risk to our capital, it is very, very real, because you want your £100 today to be worth £100 at least in the next 5 years. You don't want your £100 to be worth any less. You don't want it to be able to purchase anything less than what it can purchase today. And this leads us to the question of, is inflation good or bad? Well, inflation often is counteracted by governments increasing interest rates. And that's been one of the big narratives that we've seen out of the States over the last few weeks, since their inflation numbers came back out at 4.2% versus the 2% target that the government has set for inflation in the States. Now, with interest rates increasing, it's almost a double-edged sword, and it can be good and it can be bad depending on what camp you're in. So, for example, it's great if you are a saver. For the longest time, you haven't been able to get a decent rate of return in your bank. You haven't been able to get a decent rate of return in things like bonds, for example, or on deposit accounts or notice accounts. With interest rates going up to combat inflation, it means that you're going to get a little bit more bang for your buck in your building society account, in your readily accessible accounts, without having to take the additional risk of investing in the stock market where your capital is at risk. So if you're a saver, it could be a really, really good thing for you. If you're borrowing money, on the other hand, it's not necessarily a good thing, because when interest rates go up, mortgage rates go up, personal loan rates go up, credit card rates go up, which means that essentially you're going to be paying more for something that you need to purchase on credit. Now, that isn't necessarily all bad on its own, because let's take a step backwards for a minute. If I wanted to buy a car today and I've been putting it off for maybe 2-3 months, and I learned today that interest rates are going to increase next week, I'm likely to go and purchase that car today, because I know that the interest rates that I can gain on personal finance for that vehicle are less in comparison to what they will be in 1 week. So on the other side of this coin, inflation and interest rates rising as a result of inflation can be a good thing, because it can also stimulate the economy. It can lead to people buying more houses, buying more cars, taking out loans, borrowing money at rates cheaper than what they would be if the rates were to increase over a period of time. And this really brings us very nicely onto the stock market, because we've already alluded to the fact that if you're a saver, this is a good thing for you if interest rates go up to combat inflation. But what does that do for the stock market? Well, twofolds. Number one, you don't have to take the risk of investing in the stock market if interest rates increase significantly. You haven't got to take that additional risk. Most people will go to safer environments to get their money to work harder without the capital risk. But also from a business point of view, and this does impact the stock market in terms of company output. If the cost of things being produced by these companies to provide a service or a product is increasing, well, naturally, that means that that's going to be passed over to the consumer, you and I. And as prices increase, we may need more money, particularly what we've seen over the last 12 months with COVID, with in the States, stimulus checks going out, getting financial help. People knowing that prices are going to go up, the cost of things are going to go up, will likely need to retain more money and therefore not invest as heavily into the stock market because they're essentially just trying to cover some of their essential bills, the important stuff that they need to buy. So there is good and bad in inflation and interest rates increasing as a result of inflation. However, when you look at inflation and you look at the stock market, and I have an entire chapter dedicated to this on my investment course, what is the reason why we invest? We invest in order to at least beat inflation. So we know that our £100 today is going to be worth at least £100 in 5 years' time. Hopefully would have grown the value of that £100 to say 150. But we've started to create and build wealth over the course of time. And when we look back over historic data, we know that the stock market has always traditionally outstripped inflation quite handsomely over the long term. And this is where we get into what do you need to do and what does it actually mean for your investment portfolio. Now, I think it's really important to acknowledge here what kind of investor you are and how you've actually invested into the stock market in the first place. For many people, there are two approaches. There's active and there's passive management. Many people are in the middle where they have a mixture of the two. I have a mixture of the two. And one of the people that I use for active management is Money Farm. So Money Farm, over the last 3 to 4 weeks, actually rebalanced my personal portfolio with them because they didn't like the state of the market. They repositioned and my portfolio is up versus some of my other stuff that I hold, which are passively invested. And we can talk about passive investments and active investment strategies another time. But I think it's really important in this conversation, talking about inflation and inflation risk, to understand how you're invested. And you need to ask yourself the question, do you want to invest passively during turbulent times, or do you want to take an actively managed approach? Active managed approach sometimes can have pros and cons. Performance is often the key point of contention when it comes to active versus passive investment strategies. And this is one that I can't answer for you as a viewer of my channel. It's one that you have to answer for yourself. And that question is, well, do you cherish having a team of people behind you when markets sell off, when markets get volatile, making the best call to ensure that you're positioned in the right way so that you can take advantage of said market volatility? Or do you want to be in an environment where, for example, you're invested in either an ISA or a general investment account that simply tracks and mimics the markets as and when they trail off or as and when they grow? There are times and places for each of those approaches. Now, for me, one of the key things that I do want to highlight in this conversation about inflation and inflation risk is the impact that it can have on things like your pensions, in particular, and especially for pensions that you have forgotten. Did you know that as of last year, 2020, there is £19.4 billion worth of pensions that have been forgotten by individuals, members of the general public, just like you and I? That's 1.6 million pension pots with an average value of £13,000. Now, many people will think wealthy people can afford to forget about £13,000. How does that even happen? But actually, the numbers tell us a complete different story. These pots of money have been forgotten by normal people like you and I, who have simply lost track of their pensions because they left their employer, they've gone on to new jobs, moved addresses, and they are just in the ether. And when we talk about inflation and inflation risk, your pension being a long-term vehicle that you cannot access until 57 now, the impact of inflation is really important to consider for this because you need your money working as hard as possible for you within your pension. And this is where, again, your investment approach and how you consolidate your pensions becomes a question, because consolidation of your pensions, finding these past pensions that you may have had if you've worked at 2 or 3 companies, now is easier than ever. For example, with Money Farm, you simply need 4 pieces of information to make that work, and it can be transferred within a relatively short period of time. But your pension pots are important to make sure that you are paying attention to in this instance where inflation and inflation risk is a big conversation and markets are selling off, because that is money that you're going to need in the future. That is money that has to be and should be working as hard as possible for you. So is inflation a risk to you? Is it something that you should be concerned about? Well, these are my final thoughts. If you're investing over the long term, then no. I mean, these are transitory times. These are going to be things that are going to impact your portfolio in the short term. But if you're worried in the short term, the conversation around how you're invested, either in your general investment account, your ISA, or your pension, is a real consideration to have. Are you comfortable with having a passive approach to your investment where everything just tracks the market and there is no intervention? Or would you prefer to have an active management solution where people are pulling levers to try and position you in the best possible position to take advantage of the environment as and when you're in it? These are all key questions for you to ask. Many people argue that the cost of active investment versus the performance isn't actually worth it. These are the costs with Money Farm. And notice here that the costs and the fees that you pay are tiered. So the more money that you actually have. So for example, if you are transferring, consolidating some of your past pensions, you can get yourself into a really favorable pricing structure depending on how much you're able to transfer, how much you have invested. And again, this is an actively managed approach. Reasonable, some will argue it's all about the value that you feel that you can have. Second to this is considering some of the track record and performance. Now, past performance is no indication to future performance. However, this is performance that Money Farm have been able to deliver over the last few years across their 7 portfolios versus their competitors. Very, very competitive indeed. So the question is, short term, should you be worried? Maybe, depending on what your approach is. But as always, if you are investing for the long term, none of this really matters. This is very much a short-term thing at this point in time. Markets may be choppy for the next few months, for the remainder of the year. But long-term, what we do know is that markets tend to return extremely well over time. And if you are a long-time investor, this is simply a blip in the road and should not be something that you are concerned about or should rock the boat too much. But your investment approach is key to your success. It is key to you reaching your goal. It is key to you realizing what it is that you started on this journey for in the first place. Remember, money is a tool, life is for living. Is what you're doing right now moving you closer to the life that you want, the things that you want, the goals that you have? Those are key questions. Will inflation derail you? Will inflation delay you getting to your target? Who knows? It all depends on your approach. So at the end of the day, guys, make sure that you are comfortable with your investment approach. And for goodness sake, for your pensions, make sure that you have not left money on the table. Make sure that you are doing everything that you can to get yourself in the best position possible. So guys, are you still worried about inflation? Is this video giving you maybe a little bit of clarity? How are you feeling right now? Let me know in the comment section below. But I do have to stress that, that your approach is really crucial for you to get in this right. You're not in this for kicks and giggles, like you're in this for a reason. So making sure that you're adopting the right strategy and you've got the right approach is crucial to getting you to the finish line. At the end of the day, if you're the kind of person who will get nervous about rumors of inflation and interest rates and the market selling off, then you have to question whether an active approach like the one that Money Farm has to offer is right for you. I would argue that maybe it is, but it's worthwhile checking out just to make sure you're covering all of the bases. Personally, I felt quite a relief that they actually rebalanced my portfolio, because it meant that there was a portion of money that I didn't really have to think about, didn't have to do anything about, but each to their own. If you want to go check Money Farm out, you can use the link in the description and in the comment section, which I'm going to pin there. Again, you don't just have to use them for pensions. Yes, your pensions are important in the context of this. Please do not leave money on the table. They've also got general investment accounts and they've also got ISAs as well. But guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you've not listened to the podcast, there it is right there. We've got a cracker on again this week. I will see you later on.